What's the nature of your emergency?
Welcome back to the Tactical Living Podcast. I'm your host, Ashlie Walton, joined by Sergeant Walton. Glenn, how are you?
I'm really good.
I have such an interesting topic today, and this one came from me knowing a police officer who, I'm not really sure how long he's worked in law enforcement, but his career has led him to delving more into the mental health for the general public side of things. And he had something really crazy happen to him medical-wise while on the job. And I'm thinking about how much things have shifted for him on a spiritual level. And I think a lot of it is attributed to things that have happened to him at work. And, you know, he's all about being a Christian and all about sharing the word of God. And like, he's such a different person, even from when I first met him, maybe 6 years ago or something like that. And I wanted to talk about the role of spirituality and decision-making when it comes to being on the job.
I think a lot of people don't know how to bridge the gap. And the reason I say that, because there's pros and cons to having it on both sides, because you have those people who are very religious and like, no, this is, well, they're bringing their religion into anything and everything they do when it's not always a good spot to be.
Yeah, an example of that is the pediatrician that I worked for. She would see up to 18 years old, and she said she was a Catholic. I'm smiling as I say that because, yeah. And she would not prescribe birth control, for example. And yet you can go one door down to another pediatrician who would.
Yeah, and I think there needs to be a balance, and there's a time and place when you present the spirituality inside your realm of, especially in law enforcement or inside of any profession, to where you need to know your audience. I think that's one of the most important things.
So let's go over some of these pros. The first one that I think is that it really does help to provide this strong moral compass, because who you are in terms of your faith and how strong you believe in your faith, I think that it can help you to be able to rely on your spiritual teachings in order to make ethical choices, especially in really complex cases.
I had a conversation with another sergeant recently, and how he was talking and you know, we're just having a conversation kind of politically, a conversation involving the politics of things that are going on in our country right now. And he just kept falling back on, well, you know, I don't care what happens right now, but this is wrong. And I'm just talking very broadly right now, but he's, well, the only one who can judge me is God. And I'm like, he's all, well, I'll be hiding in the reserves when God returns, and I get to witness and bear witness to his return. And
I'm going to pause you for a second, because the beginning of your conversation made it sound like he spent the entire beginning judging somebody else.
That I did?
No, him.
Oh, that's, and that, well, and it was him judging me, because I came in and I'm like, well, if you really look at the policies, and I start going into actual articulable facts about the political nature we were talking about, it goes from political to a religious type of conversation when we weren't talking anything religious related. And that's where I think, like I said in the beginning, is knowing your audience and being able to articulate something. And this guy is super intelligent. Don't get me wrong. Like, he's actually in school right now to become a lawyer, and he is a very intelligent guy. But when he's trying to educate the younger guys in our department about this, that, and the other, and someone else comes in and on the contrary of what he's saying, then he turns into defensive this whole, well, God says, and
I'm really glad that you pointed that out, because I've seen a lot of people, I know you said that this individual is intellectual. However, I have seen a lot of people who aren't as smart as we think they are, because they use God and their religion as a deflect, as a crutch.
That's exactly what it was. And he's intelligent when it comes to book stuff, but when it comes to the political realm of things and having an understanding of how things really work, very undereducated.
Sounds like he may need some further experience in debate, especially if he's going to become a lawyer.
Absolutely.
So some other pros about this is that it offers really strong emotional resilience, especially in difficult times. And I think that it also encourages this sense of compassion and really this overall fairness. So who you are is consistent on a regular basis when you have this sort of faithfulness and moral compass?
Holding on to your values and who you are as a person is so important. And Ashlie and I have talked about this for a long time, and it's ultimately no one else should change or influence who you are as a person and what values you hold, because when you start manipulating those and changing those based off of someone else's values, you're not holding true to yourself.
Yeah, and I think too that it becomes so much easier when you are the same person all of the time. And the way that you are the same person all of the time is by making sure that you know what you believe in, you know what your morals are.
And that's so important, so you can always hold so true to yourself. Because when you start going outside your normal with it, you're not defining yourself of who you are as an individual.
Yeah, there are some cons here, though. The first one is that we do have the potential for bias in decision making.
Yeah, if you are so influenced, and we spoke about this in my conversation with the partner, is they don't have a valid argument, but they're not agreeing with what's being said to them to where they're saying, nope, that's wrong. And their mind's already made up instead of actually being able to have a conversation on the reality of things.
I'm thinking about this line from Tom MacDonald where he says that there's a difference between hate speech and speech that you hate. And, going along the same lines of that conversation you had with that officer, a first responder especially might unconsciously allow their personal beliefs to influence how they treat other individuals when they have differing values or differing opinions, or maybe when they're holding the cards in a way that's much better than what you're holding.
Yeah, and in saying that, like they start holding this grudge. They start holding your own values against you because they don't agree with it.
Something that I've seen that's real sticky that a lot of people get into legal trouble with is when there's a conflict between your personal beliefs and department policies.
This goes back to the whole 2020 kind of issues and riots and COVID and all that stuff that we were experiencing, and where, you saw law enforcement agencies having to go in and shut down businesses and fine them and arrest them for not closing. And where are we falling within our Constitution? And these officers, some didn't have an issue with it, but some pushed back and actually lost their jobs because they weren't following those orders. Another
thing is there could be difficulty in maintaining your professional boundaries. And an example of this is if a first responder perhaps feels compelled to pray with somebody who's distressed, or maybe somebody who just lost their child.
Yeah, you don't... There is a time and place where I've seen officers do that, and the sad part is they're using their platform to almost as a recruiting tool compared to being there for that person, being understanding, but not pushing your own beliefs, not pushing your own understandings of the world onto somebody else in their time of need.
There's also, you made mention of this already, but there could be misunderstandings among peers.
If you're having that misunderstanding with a partner, it's not that there's going to be those times where you can agree to disagree, or there's those times where it's just not worth it. You can't recreate the will with certain people.
If you have two people that believe in the same religion and they practice in the same modalities when it comes to their spirituality, there's also such a big difference when it comes to the emotional burden when you're facing tragedy for somebody who is a first responder versus somebody who is not. We can take our best friends, for example. She's ordained, and I've never known anybody more involved in the church than these two. And yet their level of challenge and conflict when it comes to just some of the emotional burden will never be anywhere in comparison to, let's say, you, Clint, where you have to see and experience the things that you have to do. So when you have that, there's a giant dissonance between those two, because somebody might have a certain understanding based on their personal experience, while somebody else might have their understanding based on the lack of theirs.
Yeah, and in saying that, having having that lack of personal experience when it comes to it, but being the first to judge that's one of the biggest problems our society faces.
Yeah, I hope you've gotten some value out of today's episode. If you have, do us a favor, drop a review, subscribe down below, and as always, know that I'm sending you a long, tight hug from my home to yours.